Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. The topics discussed in this podcast will reflect my opinions and are not in any way to be regarded as medical advice. Mental health issues have been increasing, and particularly there have been concerns about it increasing in children and teenagers. Now, we know the impacts of lockdowns have been very, very detrimental to the mental health of pretty much anybody affected by it. Some people just roll with the punches, as it were, and come through the other side. But a lot of children and teenagers were severely impacted by not being able to play in the park, not being able to see their friends, being kept out of school. The list goes on. Now, those who might have followed my blog over the years will know my views on the medicalisation of life, which is redefining life problems, genuine problems that people have and need to be managed or dealt with or solved as best they can be. But they're not medical problems, as in they're not caused by a medical condition, being turned into or rebadged as medical condition. And this has certainly been the case in mental health. A very, very interesting article in the Australian now. I do apologise, it is paywalled, so I don't know if you're able to access it, but I'll read a few quotes from it. Normal childhood and teenage feelings of apprehension over difficult situations are being pathologised into lifelong anxiety by worried parents and stressed teachers. And young Australians, egged on by social media influencers, are increasingly seeing it as a badge of honour amongst their peers. This is the warning from two leading clinical psychologists who are looking to upend current approaches to managing anxiety amongst young people by encouraging them to face their fears and urging well-meaning parents and teachers to pay less attention and resist kowtowing to requests for special treatment, which too often makes things worse. Now, very interesting, that was a quote. Very, very interesting book called Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier. You can get it on Amazon, and no, I don't get a cent. Where she talks about how the more you ask children about how they're feeling, the worse they're actually likely to feel. And particularly in younger children, an adult says to them, are you okay? There's implicit in that the idea that they might not be. And children subliminally, so this is not being a conscious process, just a subconscious or subliminal process, wonder, well, adults probably know more than me. They might think there's something wrong with me. Maybe there is something wrong with me. No, I don't feel that good. And we also know that children will feel their emotions and express their emotions, but also move past their emotions. Now, for example, a teenager may break up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and it's the end of the world as we know it. And 2 days later, the world is kept spinning and they're okay. Now, some, it takes longer than that, and yes, there are some people who need genuine input from mental health services. No way saying that is not the case. But not every bad thing that happens to everybody means that that person has a defined mental health illness and needs treatment. Now, the other key point in all of this is that resilience has become a dirty word, and it should never have become a dirty word. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to cope with everything by ourselves and shouldn't ask for help, but it does mean that it is okay to look to try and solve our own problems and get through them. I was listening yesterday to a podcast, and there have been a few I've heard recently about Stoicism, which is an ancient Greek philosophy. And the concept behind Stoicism is essentially that bad things will happen and you need to work your way through them. And the twist on that is the only way is through. So essentially that's saying that you can't really medicate away your problems, even though there may at times be a role for medication. And I really want to emphasise that none of this is in any way, shape or form medical advice. But it's fair to say that the more we say to people in general, and children and teenagers in particular, that you are incapable of solving your own problems. So if you and Johnny have had a row on the playground, that somehow the parents and the teachers need to sort it out. And I'm not talking about them getting involved in a punch-up. In fact, in some respects, a punch-up, they'd probably settle. And I'm not saying it's good. I'm not advocating it, okay. But, probably sorts the issue out there and then, whereas long, protracted sessions with therapists, might actually not have the same effect. And maybe left to their own devices, Johnny and the other kid would just get on with it, and 3 days later be best mates again. I remember something like that when I was in school, so it certainly does happen. Meanwhile, mindfulness may be as effective as antidepressants for anxiety symptoms. So a study has shown that mindfulness, which is just focusing on one thing at a time and particularly being in the present moment. So what am I doing now? I'm recording this podcast. So I'm not thinking about when the power bill is due. I'm not thinking about what happened 3 weeks ago. I'm focusing on what I'm doing at this exact moment in time. Is very, very beneficial, or as beneficial as medication, when it comes to anxiety. And that probably shouldn't come as a great surprise, because often anxiety can be quite normal, not if it's debilitating, but it can be, I've got an exam coming up, I'm a little bit anxious about it. That is quite normal. It's actually quite useful. It gets a bit of adrenaline floating through the system, and that can be beneficial. And then after the exam is over, things revert to normal. Or, I've got a new project, or I've got a deadline, or there is something that I need to be doing, and, I feel a little bit tense, anxious, or nervous about it. That can be a useful thing. Again, if it goes too far, not, but can be a useful thing. And bringing us back to the present moment, so not thinking about the deadline, but thinking about what do I need to do or could be doing at this exact moment is beneficial. Eating your lunch, not scrolling through Facebook, but actually focusing on what you're eating. So you can be mindful doing anything. Yes, it can include meditation, guided relaxations, sitting in nature. All of those are very, very good as well. But, it can be a mindful approach can be as simple as just concentrating on eating rather than thinking about doing something else or watching a screen whilst you're eating. But as usual, government tends to be unhelpful. There's an interesting article on Reason by Lenore Skenazy, 10 most infuriating challenges to free-range parenting. Free-range parenting, which used to just be normal parenting. I remember when I was a kid, I rode my bike to school. I'm still here. A lot of children walked to and from school. You can't do that anymore. The police get involved when an 8-year-old is riding a bike, or reckless conduct when a 10-year-old child walked into a town with a population of 370. Toronto has banned tobogganing on 45 hills, as these might have hazards such as rocks. Again, I'm not familiar with snow, and I'd probably get into trouble if I went on it. But the idea that children have to be constantly monitored, and yes, babies probably do need to be monitored more than 18-year-olds, hello. But this constant monitoring and the message that it gets sent to children that the world is a scary place and they can't even walk to school, and not for a 3-year-old, obviously. And the beginning of it is probably the parent walking with them, or maybe they walk with a few of them, but it just sends a message that you as a child cannot cope with basic activities, and therefore that is going to increase, not decrease, anxiety. So our obsession with physical threats, and that includes stranger danger, and yes, it's real, albeit 95% or so of assaults of any description on children are not by strangers, but by people known to the child. But again, that's for another day. But our obsession with physical threats has left us blind, either not willingly or willingly, to the long-term problems created by instilling unnecessary fear into our children and teenagers. And every child is different, and it is up to the parents to make decisions about what is an age-appropriate activity for that child. Once we get government and police involved, we've removed that decision-making from parents. And as per usual, when that happens, the situation gets worse. So we may be in a back to the future moment if we're starting to get some psychologists saying we need to upend our approach to how we manage anxiety in teenagers, and essentially saying we need to look at what worked relatively well in years gone by. And pendulums need to swing. They can go to one extreme. It's not about throwing caution to the winds. It is not about taking the approach we've got now, where every single bad hair day is called for 20 sessions of therapy and maybe some medication as well. Provide help and support that's necessary and appropriate, but we also need to be encouraging, and I want to emphasise again, age-specific and to the discretion of the parents, managing their own problems and learning from such, so that next time a similar situation arrives, they have the confidence to be able to deal with it themselves. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and consider subscribing. Tell your friends. If there are topics you'd like to see covered, be in touch through the chat or email info@drjoe.net.au. We'll be uploading new content each Monday, and soon we'll be putting these videos out on X. You can follow me there at Dr. Joe's DIY Health.